Brit. A lone cowboy spent years alone, until a hang girl suddenly breathed in his arms. The cowboy had lived on the wide, empty plains for many years.
Brit. His small ranch sat alone in the middle of rolling fields, where the wind whispered across the tall grass and the sun painted the sky in endless shades of orange and red every evening. The world around him was quiet, almost painfully quiet, and he had grown used to it. Brit.
He liked the silence in some ways. It made him feel free, and it kept the memories of his past at a distance.
Brit. Yet there were times when the emptiness felt heavy, pressing down on him in the long, lonely hours. Every morning he rose before the sun, his boots crunching on the dry dirt as he walked outside to begin his chores. Brit. He tended to his cattle with patient hands, feeding them and making sure the fences were strong enough to keep them from wandering. He repaired broken gates, mended fences, and checked every corner of the property with careful eyes. Brit. Each task, though repetitive, brought him a quiet satisfaction. He liked the feeling of work that had visible results, the knowledge that he was keeping his little world in order, that nothing was neglected on his watch. Brit. The cowboy had not always lived like this. Long ago he had known the noise and chaos of towns, the constant presence of other people, the crowded streets, and the endless conversations. Brit. He had friends once, and maybe even love, though those memories were fading now, like distant echoes in the back of his mind. Something had happened to make him leave it all behind. Brit. A loss, a heartbreak, a mistake. He never spoke of it, not even to himself. The ranch became his refuge, a place where the world could not hurt him anymore. But even in this solitude, the human heart has a way of feeling its own emptiness. Brit. On quiet nights as he sat by the fire in his small wooden cabin, the silence would press close, and he would remember the warmth of voices he had not heard for years. The cabin was modest but sturdy, built from weathered timber that smelled faintly of pine and earth. Brit. The furniture was simple. A wooden table, a few chairs, a bed with a worn quilt, and shelves holding old books he occasionally read when the evenings grew too long. Brit. He had a small stove for cooking, a kettle that whistled when water boiled, and a lamp that filled the room with soft yellow light. Even in his isolation, he took pride in keeping his space neat. Brit. Everything had its place, and every corner of the cabin carried a sense of care, a silent testament to a life lived with thought and responsibility.
Days stretched on with quiet repetition.
Brit. The cowboy would ride his horse across the fields, checking fences, looking for strays, and watching the horizon for signs of storms. Brit. The sky changed endlessly, a canvas that reflected his moods. Bright and hopeful in the mornings, heavy and gray when clouds gathered, soft and fading in the evenings as the sun dipped behind distant hills. Brit. He often felt small beneath the vast expanse of sky, a single person among so much open space. Sometimes it was comforting. Brit. Other times it made him ache for a kind of company he had almost forgotten existed. Despite the loneliness, he found small joys in the little things. Brit. The smell of fresh hay in the morning, the sound of the wind through the grass, the sight of his horses grazing peacefully. It all gave him moments of quiet happiness. Brit. He had learned to notice details that others might overlook. The tracks of a fox at the edge of the field, the patterns of birds in flight, the way the clouds moved before a storm. These details filled his days with subtle excitement, keeping his mind sharp and his senses alert. Brit. Evenings were the hardest. After the chores were done and the cattle were secure, he would sit by the fire and stare into the flames, listening to the night sounds. The distant call of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the grass, the soft murmur of the wind. Brit. He thought about the people he had left behind, about the life he had abandoned for solitude. He sometimes wondered if he would ever speak to another person again, if he would ever feel the warmth of conversation, the comfort of laughter shared with someone who cared. Brit. Those thoughts brought a mix of sadness and longing, a quiet ache that never fully went away. The cowboy had a routine, and he clung to it because it gave him stability. He knew every inch of his land, every animal, and every part of the cabin. He had a sense of control in a world that had once felt unpredictable and cruel. But even in control, he knew that life could surprise him, and there were nights when that knowledge made him uneasy. He sometimes imagined visitors, travelers who might appear on his land, strangers whose intentions were unknown. Those thoughts made him cautious, and he kept himself ready for anything, though he rarely saw another soul. On particularly quiet nights, he would sit on the porch and watch the stars. The sky seemed endless, filled with countless points of light that reminded him how small he was in the universe. And yet, in that smallness, there was a strange kind of peace. He felt connected to something larger than himself, a force that had shaped the land and the life he now led. The stars were constant, a silent company in the vastness of the world, and he took comfort in their quiet presence. Sometimes the cowboy spoke aloud to himself, as if the wind could carry his words. He would talk about the weather, the animals, or random thoughts that came to him during long rides across the plains. It was not a replacement for human conversation, but it helped him feel less alone. His voice, echoing softly in the empty fields, reminded him that he was alive, that he was still part of the world in his own small way. Even with all his solitude, the cowboy had learned patience, resilience, and observation. He had learned to survive not only physically but emotionally, to face long stretches of silence without losing himself. He knew the importance of self-reliance, of understanding the land and respecting its rhythms. Yet beneath all the hard work and discipline, there was a heart that still longed for connection, even if he did not fully admit it to himself. He had been alone for so long that he almost forgot how human it was to crave companionship, to seek understanding and warmth from another soul. And so his life continued, a careful balance of work, reflection, and quiet moments under the vast sky. The plains were his home, the cabin his refuge, and the animals his silent companions. He was a man who had chosen solitude, yet his heart remained open, waiting for something, or someone, that could break through the long years of isolation. Little did he know the world had a way of sending unexpected events, moments that could change a life in a single heartbeat, even for a man who had lived so long alone. The cowboy did not yet know that his patience, his careful observation, and his resilient heart would soon be tested in ways he had never imagined. The land had kept him safe, but it was also about to teach him that life could surprise even the most cautious of hearts. A single moment, a sudden turn of events, could bring new responsibility, fear, and hope all at once. Desperate, and in the quiet stretches of his lonely life, he would discover that human connection could arrive when it was least expected, transforming everything he had known into something entirely new. It was late in the afternoon when the cowboy decided to make one of his usual rounds around the property. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling through the tall grass and bending the trees along the edges of the ranch. The sky was streaked with soft shades of pink and gold, signaling that the day was beginning to give way to night. He rode his horse slowly, taking in every familiar sight, but his mind wandered in the usual ways it did during these long rides.
He thought about the quiet, about the emptiness, about how life had changed for him over the years.
As he neared the barn at the far edge of the property, something felt off. The barn had been empty all day, as it always was, but now there was a strange shadow near one of the corners. The cowboy squinted, adjusting his hat against the late sun. His heart began to beat a little faster, though he could not explain why. He had seen shadows and shapes before, sometimes animals, sometimes just the play of light, but this felt different. It made him uneasy in a way he had not felt for a long time. He nudged his horse to move closer, keeping his eyes fixed on the barn. The wooden structure creaked slightly in the wind, the doors swaying gently on their hinges. The cowboy's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe a stray animal had wandered inside. Perhaps a branch had fallen nearby, casting a strange shadow. He tried to calm himself, telling himself it was nothing, but his instincts told him to be careful. After so many years alone, he had learned to trust the small signs, the little hints that something unusual was happening. He dismounted slowly, letting the horse graze on the grass near the barn while he approached on foot. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots, each step sounding louder than it should have in the quiet. His eyes scanned the dim interior, moving from one shadow to another, searching for the cause of his unease. It was then that he noticed a shape hanging in the corner, motionless and silent. At first, he thought it might be a coat or some old piece of cloth, forgotten and swinging in the breeze. But as he got closer, his heart skipped a beat. The shape was unmistakably human. For a moment, the cowboy froze. He had never faced a situation like this before, and the shock made him hesitate. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He felt fear, confusion, and a sudden rush of adrenaline. He reminded himself to stay calm, to act carefully. Panic would not help. He took a deep breath and stepped closer, his boots careful on the dusty floor. The air felt heavier now, and the barn seemed quieter than ever, as if the world itself was holding its breath. As he drew nearer, he saw the figure more clearly. It was a young girl, and she appeared to be in trouble. The cowboy's heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a strange urgency. He could not leave her there, not when there was a chance, however small, that she could be helped. He moved quickly, but carefully, reaching up to support her, and slowly untangling the ropes that held her. Every second felt like an eternity, his hands steady despite the fear and the disbelief that gripped him. The girl's body was limp at first, and the cowboy's mind filled with worry. He spoke to her softly, trying to offer comfort with his words, even though he did not know if she could hear him. "It's okay," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're safe now. I've got you." He gently lifted her into his arms, careful not to hurt her further. Barn, once familiar and safe, now felt like the center of a small, fragile world where every heartbeat mattered. As he carried her toward the cabin, he noticed the little signs of life returning. A faint cough, a shallow breath, but small but real indications that she was still with him, still fighting. Relief surged through him, mingled with a new kind of fear. What if she could not recover? What if he failed despite his best efforts? He pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. Every step toward the cabin was careful, deliberate, guided by the instinct to protect and preserve life. By the time he reached the cabin, the sky had darkened, and the first stars were beginning to appear. He laid her down gently on a bed, covering her with a quilt to keep her warm. He checked her pulse, held her hand, and whispered words of encouragement, though his own voice trembled slightly. He felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and awe. In all his years of solitude, he had never experienced anything like this. The world, which had seemed predictable and safe in its emptiness, had suddenly delivered a test he had never imagined. The cowboy moved around the cabin quickly, preparing water, soft blankets, and a simple meal, though he knew she might not be able to eat yet. He cleaned the small cuts and scrapes on her arms and face, remnants of whatever struggle had brought her to this state. All the while he talked to her gently, letting her know she was not alone. His voice was calm, steady, and kind, and he repeated simple words. "You're safe." Desperate, the repetition seemed to matter, a way of keeping hope alive when fear threatened to overwhelm both of them. Hours passed slowly, Britt. The cowboy sat by her side, watching for any sign of movement, any change in her breathing. The night deepened, and the wind outside whispered against the cabin walls, a constant reminder of the world beyond. But inside, there was only the two of them, a quiet, fragile space suspended between fear and hope. The cowboy's mind wandered briefly to his years of solitude. Britt. He realized that in all that time he had never faced a situation that mattered as much as this. Britt. Every decision, every movement now carried weight, and he felt a strange sense of purpose he had not known for years. The girl stirred slightly, coughing weakly, and the cowboy leaned closer. Britt. That's good, he said softly. You're okay, Britt. Just keep breathing. I'm right here. Britt. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, confused and frightened, but alive. The cowboy offered a gentle smile, trying to ease her fear without words, showing her that she was safe, but he helped her sit up slowly, supporting her carefully. Each movement was deliberate, cautious, yet filled with care. Britt. In that moment, the bond between them began, fragile but undeniable. As the night wore on, the cowboy stayed alert. He had never known fear and responsibility in this way before. It was not the fear of danger, or of animals, or even of the empty world around him. It was the fear of losing someone who had suddenly become so important in his life. Britt. He could not explain why this mattered so much, only that it did. Every heartbeat, every breath became a reminder of the miracle that had occurred, the delicate gift of life in the midst of his quiet, lonely existence. Britt. He reflected on how life could change in an instant. One moment he had been alone, accustomed to the endless routine of solitude. Britt. The next he was carrying another human being in his arms, responsible for her life, her comfort, her recovery. The thought was overwhelming, yet there was a strange sense of joy beneath it all. Britt. In this unexpected event he found meaning, a purpose that had been missing for so long. He realized that life, even on the quiet plains, had surprises that could bring new beginnings even to those who had thought their days of connection were over. Britt. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and gold, the girl had calmed, breathing steadily in her small bed. Britt. The cowboy watched her carefully, his mind still alert, but a sense of calm had settled over him. He felt a mix of exhaustion and wonder, the emotional weight of the night pressing on him, yet softened by the knowledge that she was alive. Britt. The barn, the shadows, the fear. They all seemed distant now, replaced by a new reality, fragile but full of potential. In the quiet morning he sat by the cabin window looking out at the fields, reflecting on what had happened. He understood that nothing would be the same again. His life, once predictable and solitary, had been changed in a single, extraordinary night. Britt. The girl's survival was a reminder that life could be fragile, but it could also be miraculous. And in the midst of his long years of isolation, he had been reminded that connection, compassion, and care were never truly lost, even in the loneliest of places. Britt. The first rays of sunlight spilled into the cabin, casting a warm glow across the wooden floor. The cowboy had stayed awake most of the night, sitting quietly beside the bed where the girl had been resting. He had watched her breathing carefully, making sure she was safe, his own mind still racing from the events of the previous evening. Despite the exhaustion that weighed on his body, he felt a strange sense of anticipation. Britt. There was something about this moment that made him realize the world was no longer the same for him. He leaned closer, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Britt. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, a little unsure. as though she were waking from a long, confusing dream. The cowboy's heart skipped a beat at the sight. Brit. She was alive, really alive, and the relief that filled him was overwhelming. He smiled gently, keeping his tone soft so as not to startle her. Brit, it's okay, he whispered. You're safe. Brit, you're with me now.
The words felt strange to say out loud, but in that small cabin they carried the weight of truth.
The girl blinked, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings. Her eyes met his, wide and cautious. There was fear there, yes, but also curiosity. She tried to speak, but only a faint whisper came out. Brit. The cowboy nodded encouragingly, offering her reassurance through both his words and the steady calm in his gaze. Take your time, he said. Brit. But.
Brit. His presence alone seemed to calm her, the kind of calm that can only come from someone who has survived many trials and knows how to face uncertainty with steady hands.
Brit slowly, she began to move, first lifting her hand to touch the blanket over her shoulders, then shifting her head slightly as she took in more of the cabin. The cowboy noticed every small motion, every flutter of the eyelids, every hesitant breath. Brit. Each one told him she was recovering, that life had returned to her in small, miraculous increments. He felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. This fragile human being was now in his care, and he could feel the weight of that truth pressing on his shoulders. Brit. He offered her a sip of water, holding the cup carefully so that she would not spill a drop. She took it slowly, her hands trembling just a little, but she managed to drink. That small act filled him with relief and wonder. The simplest gestures, the act of drinking, of breathing, of blinking awake, felt monumental after the night they had endured. But he realized, in that quiet moment, how fragile life could be, and how precious it was when it returned against the odds. The girl's voice was soft when she finally spoke, barely above a whisper. Brit. She asked where she was, and the cowboy explained simply, without adding too much that might frighten her. You're at my home, he said. Brit.
You're safe here. No one will hurt you.
Brit, you're not alone anymore.
She listened carefully, taking in his words, and a flicker of understanding passed across her face.
Brit. She did not yet smile, but the tension in her body began to ease just slightly. It was a small victory, but to the cowboy it felt enormous. Brit. As the morning light grew stronger, he helped her sit up more comfortably, adjusting pillows and blankets to support her. Every movement was careful, gentle, full of respect. Brit. He offered her a simple breakfast, warm bread, a little milk, and some fruit. She hesitated at first, but hunger overcame fear, and she took small bites. Brit. He watched patiently, encouraging her with kind words and soft nods, never rushing her, never forcing her. In this simple act of feeding her, a bond began to form, a bond built on trust, patience, and the shared experience of the night's ordeal. Brit. Time passed slowly, but the cabin began to feel warmer, more alive. The girl's eyes lingered on the cowboy, studying him with quiet curiosity. She seemed to notice details she had not before, the gentle way he moved, the calmness in his voice, the quiet strength in his hands. For the first time in her young life, she felt a sense of safety that was both unfamiliar and comforting. Brit. And for the cowboy who had spent so many years alone, there was a growing realization that the solitude he had clung to might no longer be complete. Brit. There was someone else now, someone whose life depended on him, someone who would change the rhythm of his days in ways he could not yet imagine. He began to tell her small stories, soft tales about the ranch, about the animals, and about the wide open plains. Brit. He spoke in a gentle voice, describing sunsets and storms, the quiet beauty of the world around them, and the little routines that made life meaningful in isolation. She listened, wide-eyed, sometimes nodding, sometimes simply staring, absorbing the calm and steadiness in his words. There was a warmth growing between them, not yet spoken but understood, a mutual acknowledgement that each had survived something difficult, and now each had a reason to care for the other. The cowboy noticed her curiosity and began to show her the small routines of the ranch. He led her carefully to the barn, showing her the horses and explaining their habits. He taught her how to feed them, how to brush their coats, how to observe their behavior. She listened attentively, occasionally reaching out to touch a horse or pat its neck, and the cowboy watched with quiet satisfaction. These simple lessons were more than chores. They were a way of helping her feel connected, to establish a rhythm in life that could provide comfort and stability. As the day moved on, they shared moments of silence, sitting together on the porch, watching the wind ripple across the fields. Sometimes they simply watched, each lost in their own thoughts. But there was an unspoken bond forming. The cowboy could feel it in the way she gradually relaxed in his presence, and the way she allowed herself to stay near him without fear. And he felt it in himself too, a shift from complete solitude to shared responsibility, from the quiet of the plains to a quiet filled with life, even if fragile and new.
By evening, the cowboy prepared a small meal and they ate together.
He kept his movements careful, gentle and deliberate, speaking softly and encouraging her to eat slowly. She began to smile faintly, the first small sign that the tension of the night was fading. It was not a full smile, but it was enough to lift the heavy weight from his chest. That tiny gesture filled him with hope and gratitude, a reminder that life could surprise even in the most unexpected ways. As night fell again, the cowboy helped her settle into the bed, covering her with the warm quilt once more. He stayed nearby, watching her sleep, listening to her breathing, and feeling a deep, protective instinct stir within him. He thought about the day that had passed, the fear, the uncertainty, and now the small, miraculous progress.
It had been a day of awakening in more ways than one. Not only had she awakened physically, but a part of him had awakened too.
He felt emotions he had long suppressed, hope, responsibility, and a kind of tender joy he had thought was lost to him forever. He realized that life had a way of arriving unexpectedly, in moments that could change everything. One night he had been alone, and the next day he was caring for someone who had been given a second chance at life.
It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once.
Yet he embraced it fully, understanding that this experience, as sudden and improbable as it seemed, was meaningful. It reminded him that even the loneliest of hearts could be touched, that even in isolation the world could deliver moments of connection and hope. As the hours passed, he began to think about what would come next. He did not know the girl's past or how she had come to be in such a desperate situation, and he did not need to know right away. What mattered was the present, the fragile bond forming between them and the trust that was slowly building. He resolved to keep her safe, to help her regain her strength, and to show her that kindness and care still existed, even in a world that could sometimes feel cruel. Through the long night, as the stars sparkled over the quiet plains, he sat by her side and reflected on the unexpected ways life could change. He had spent years alone, accustomed to routine and solitude, and now he had discovered something profoundly human: the power of connection, trust, and compassion.
It was a lesson he had not expected, but one he welcomed with a full heart.
And in that quiet cabin, with the girl breathing softly beside him, he knew that life would never be the same again. The days that followed were unlike any the cowboy had experienced in years. The quiet routines of his solitary life had been interrupted, but in a way that brought new purpose and meaning. Each morning he woke to the sound of the girl's soft breathing, a rhythm that reminded him life was fragile yet resilient. He would carefully watch her, ensuring she was comfortable and safe, and then help her rise from the bed for the first time since the night of her rescue. He guided her gently, steadying her as she found her footing in a world that had suddenly grown both strange and beautiful. Breakfast became a shared ritual. He would prepare warm bread, milk, and fruit, sometimes adding small treats he had saved for rare occasions. The girl, who had been cautious at first, began to eat more confidently, learning to trust that these small acts of nourishment would be safe and kind. With each bite, the cowboy could see her strength returning, a physical recovery mirrored by an emotional one. Their conversations were still limited at first, mostly simple questions and answers, but every word built trust and comfort between them. The cowboy began showing her the routines of the ranch. He introduced her to the animals, horses, chickens, and even a small herd of cattle. He taught her how to feed them, how to brush their coats, and how to notice subtle behaviors that revealed the animals' moods. At first, she was hesitant, unsure of her place in this quiet, expansive world. But gradually, she began to imitate his movements, learning not just the skills of caring for the ranch, but also the rhythm of life that came with responsibility.
The cowboy watched her closely, guiding her patiently, never rushing, never forcing, letting her gain confidence at her own pace. They shared many quiet moments together.
Sometimes they sat on the porch, looking out over the fields as the wind swept across the plains. They didn't always speak. Often they simply existed together, sharing the calm and the silence. In those moments, a deep bond began to form. The cowboy had spent years alone, but now he found that presence mattered more than words. Just being near another human being, witnessing their small victories and struggles, brought a sense of fulfillment he had thought lost forever. As she regained strength, the girl began to share more of her story.
She spoke slowly, carefully choosing words, sometimes stopping to gather courage before continuing. The cowboy listened with patience, never interrupting, letting her feel safe enough to trust him with the truth.
Her past had been difficult, full of fear and confusion. But in the calm of the ranch, those memories seemed less threatening.
The cowboy offered no judgment, only steady support, a listening ear, and the understanding that healing often required time and gentle care.
They began to laugh together, small and cautious at first, but gradually more freely. A spilled bucket of water, a playful horse nudging her arm, a joke about her clumsy attempts at milking a cow. These little moments became highlights of their days. The cowboy realized that laughter, like trust, was a part of life he had almost forgotten. It was a healing force, a way to bring light into the shadows of fear and loneliness. And the girl, who had lived through moments of despair, began to find joy in small, everyday occurrences, discovering that happiness could exist even after trauma. The cowboy also taught her the practical skills needed to survive and thrive on the ranch. She learned to collect firewood, to start a stove safely, and to care for the small garden he had cultivated. Each lesson was more than just survival. It was a way to build confidence, to help her feel capable, and to give her a sense of accomplishment. He encouraged her gently, praising her efforts, and she began to trust not only him but also herself. The slow rhythm of the ranch life provided a sense of order and security, something she had not experienced before. Evenings were filled with stories. The cowboy would recount his own life, carefully leaving out the pain he had once carried, focusing instead on lessons learned, moments of beauty, and the quiet satisfaction of a life spent close to nature. The girl would listen intently, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply absorbing the words. In these shared stories, they found a connection that went beyond words, a mutual understanding of the fragility of life, the importance of kindness, and the power of care and compassion. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Rain pelted the roof of the cabin, and the wind whipped through the trees. The girl looked frightened, unsure how to react. The cowboy guided her to the safety of the porch, holding her hand and speaking softly. "Britt, it's okay," he said. "The storm will pass, and we'll be safe here together." She clung to him for comfort, and in that moment a trust deeper than words formed. But she realized that she could rely on him not just for physical safety, but also for emotional strength. And the cowboy felt a quiet pride in knowing he could offer that support, that he could protect someone with care and patience. Desperate. As the storm passed, they worked together to secure the barn and check on the animals. The girl moved with growing confidence, handling tasks that only days ago would have seemed impossible. Britt. The cowboy watched her with quiet admiration, realizing how far she had come, not just in strength, but in spirit.
Britt. Each small success reinforced the bond between them, a shared journey of healing and growth that neither had anticipated. Even at night, the cabin no longer felt silent.
The girl would tell him small things she had observed during the day. The way a bird had landed on the fence, the unusual shape of clouds, the sound of a distant river. The cowboy listened attentively, asking questions, showing interest in her perspective. Britt. In these moments he recognized the importance of connection, of giving attention and respect to another human being's experience. He realized that life, even in solitude, could become richer and more meaningful when shared. Britt. Over time, they established a routine that balanced care, learning, and companionship. The cowboy knew he could not erase the past or solve all the girl's struggles, but he could offer stability, safety, and kindness. Britt. And in offering that, he discovered a transformation in himself. The isolation he had once cherished began to feel different. It was no longer a protective wall, but a space shared with someone who mattered. Britt. He learned that trust, patience, and compassion could bring life to even the loneliest corners of the world. The girl, too, began to change. Britt. She grew stronger, more confident, and more willing to engage with the world around her. The fear that had dominated her past receded in the warmth of the cowboy's care. Britt. She learned that life could be gentle, that people could be trustworthy, and that the world, while unpredictable, held beauty and kindness as well. She laughed more freely, moved with confidence, and began to embrace the routines of the ranch as her own. Britt. Dancing. In those days, the cowboy and the girl formed a bond that was profound and lasting. It was not born of words alone, but of shared experiences, mutual care, and the quiet understanding that comes from surviving hardship together. Britt. They relied on one another, supported one another, and discovered the deep satisfaction of companionship. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new joys, and they faced them side by side, learning that even in the vast openness of the plains, connection could flourish. Britt. And so, life on the ranch continued, transformed by the presence of the girl. The cowboy, once content in solitude, now found purpose in guiding, protecting, and teaching. Britt. The girl, once frightened and fragile, found strength, trust, and the first hints of joy in a life that had seemed harsh and unpredictable. Britt. Together they discovered that healing was not a solitary journey, but one that could be shared, nurtured, and celebrated in the quiet moments of daily life. The days passed into weeks, each one building on the last. The bond between them grew stronger, and both began to see a future that neither could have imagined alone. Britt. The cowboy realized that life's miracles were not always grand or dramatic. They could be found in the slow recovery of trust, in small victories, and in the simple act of being present for someone who needed care and guidance. Britt. And the girl discovered that even after fear and hardship, there could be safety, kindness, and hope. In the quiet of the evenings, when the stars blanketed the sky and the wind whispered across the plains, the cowboy and the girl would sit together on the porch, reflecting on the day. Britt. They no longer needed many words. Their connection was clear in gestures, in shared smiles, and in the comfort of knowing that someone else was there, steadfast and reliable, beside them, Brit. And in that shared silence, they found a deep, enduring understanding. That life, even after pain and isolation, could offer joy, trust, and companionship, if only one was willing to embrace it. Brit. Time passed slowly on the ranch, each day blending into the next, with quiet purpose and steady routines. The cowboy and the girl had settled into a rhythm that balanced work, care, and companionship. What had begun as a fragile connection born of fear and uncertainty had grown into something strong, dependable, and deeply human. Every morning the sun would rise over the rolling plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and both of them would wake with a sense of hope, ready to face whatever the day might bring.
The girl had grown stronger in both body and spirit.
But she moved through the ranch with confidence now, carrying out her tasks with skill and care. She fed the animals, checked the fences, tended the small garden, and learned to anticipate the needs of the household. But each accomplishment, however small, was a victory, not just for her survival, but for the trust and courage she had built since arriving at the cowboy's home. She began to smile more freely, laugh more easily, and even share small stories from her past. Though some of her memories were sad, the cowboy never pressed her to talk. He had learned that healing required patience, that recovery could not be rushed, and that trust, once broken, needed time to grow. The cowboy, too, had changed in ways he had never expected. Years of solitude had made him strong and self-reliant, but they had also left him isolated from human connection.
Now, with the girl in his life, he rediscovered a warmth and compassion he had long set aside.
He had always known how to care for animals, tend the land, and face the harsh realities of life on the plains. But caring for another person brought new challenges, new rewards, and a sense of purpose that no routine or task alone could provide. He realized that life, even in its quietest moments, could be richer when shared. The bond between them deepened as the days went on. They shared stories, laughter, and sometimes even comfortable silence.
The girl would sit beside the cowboy as he mended fences or prepared food, asking questions and offering her own observations. He listened carefully, valuing her opinions, and in doing so he helped her feel seen and heard.
The girl, in turn, began to notice the little ways he cared for her, the gentle reminders to rest, the small gestures of protection, the calm patience in every word he spoke. Slowly, a profound trust formed between them, one that could withstand the uncertainties of the world beyond the ranch. The world outside the ranch eventually made its presence known.
A letter arrived for the girl, carried by a passing traveler who had stopped briefly at the property. It was from her family, who had been searching for her since she had disappeared.
Desperate, the cowboy handed it to her carefully, understanding the significance of the moment. The girl held the letter in her hands, trembling slightly. She read the words with quiet attention, and though her eyes filled with tears, they were not only tears of sorrow, they were also tears of relief and hope.
Her family wanted to see her again, to bring her back into the world she had left behind.
The cowboy watched silently, offering only the support she needed without pushing or guiding her decision. He understood that this was her choice, her path, and that she needed to follow her heart. When she looked up at him with gratitude in her eyes, he felt a deep sense of pride in the strength she had gained. She had come so far, and he knew that the trust and confidence they had built together would remain with her, no matter where life led her next. After careful thought, the girl made a decision that surprised no one more than herself. She would visit her family, reconnect with the people who had been searching for her, but she would not leave the cowboy behind entirely. She had come to value the home, the safety, and the quiet companionship he offered. She realized that life could hold more than one form of love and care. that family could extend beyond blood, and that the bond they had formed was as important as any family connection. Britt. The cowboy accepted her decision with quiet understanding, grateful that their paths had crossed and that the future held promise for both of them. The day she prepared to visit her family, the cowboy helped her pack, offering practical advice and gentle reminders. Britt. He carried her small belongings, guided her carefully to the horse, and ensured she was ready for the journey ahead. Though the ranch would feel emptier in her absence, he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she was strong enough to face the world outside. Britt contempt. He had done his part, and now it was time for her to continue her life with courage, confidence, and the knowledge that she was never truly alone. Britt. As she rode away toward the distant horizon, the cowboy stood on the porch, watching her figure grow smaller against the backdrop of the endless plains. He felt a mixture of pride, sadness, and hope. Britt. Their time together had changed both of them profoundly. The cowboy had learned that solitude, while comforting, could never replace connection, trust, and shared experience. Britt. And the girl had learned that safety, kindness, and resilience could be found even in the most unexpected places. The ranch returned to its quiet routines, but it no longer felt empty. Britt. The memories of the days they had spent together lingered in every corner of the cabin, in the soft footsteps of the animals, and in the way the sunlight fell across the fields. Britt. The cowboy often found himself pausing during his chores, remembering the laughter, the small victories, and the moments of trust that had defined their shared journey. Britt. He realized that life's miracles did not always come in grand gestures. They often appeared in quiet moments, in the slow rebuilding of trust, and in the bonds formed through care and patience. Britt. Time moved on, as it always does, and the cowboy continued to live on the ranch, tending to the land and the animals with the same diligence he always had. But now he carried with him the knowledge that life could be shared, that connection was possible even after long years of isolation, and that human hearts were capable of incredible resilience. Britt. He often thought of the girl, imagining her smiling, laughing, and thriving with her family, carrying the lessons of trust and care they had learned together. Britt. On quiet evenings he would sit on the porch and look at the horizon, remembering the night she had arrived and the moments that followed. He thought about the fear, the uncertainty, the relief, and the joy of that first day. Britt. He understood that life had given him a rare gift, the opportunity to touch another person's life, to guide and protect, and to rediscover the warmth of companionship. In that reflection he found peace. Britt. The girl, too, carried the cowboy's lessons with her. She learned to trust her instincts, to approach the world with courage, and to recognize the value of kindness and patience. Britt. She never forgot the man who had given her a second chance at life, who had offered care without judgment, and who had shown her the quiet power of human connection. Britt. Though their daily routines had diverged, the bond between them remained, a quiet, enduring presence in both of their hearts. And so, life continued on the plains. The cowboy rose each morning, tending to his cattle, repairing fences, and watching the sunrise paint the sky. But now each day held a new depth, a gentle awareness of the extraordinary in the ordinary. Desperate. Every task, every moment of quiet, was a reminder that life's greatest treasures often came from simple acts of care, trust, and companionship. Years later, he would tell stories to the few visitors who occasionally passed through the plains. Britt. He would speak not only of the land, the animals, and the routines of ranch life, but also of the miraculous ways life could change in a single night. Britt. He would tell of the girl who had arrived unexpectedly, how trust and patience had nurtured her recovery, and how shared experience had transformed his own life. Britt. Though his audience might listen politely, it was the truth in his voice, the quiet strength of someone who had lived through fear, hope, and connection that left the deepest impression. The cowboy understood, more than ever, that life's meaning was not found in solitude alone. Britt. It was found in connection, in helping others, and in opening one's heart to the unexpected. The ranch, the plains, and the quiet cabin had been his sanctuary, but the gift of caring for another had shown him a new world, one filled with hope, resilience, and the quiet joy of companionship. Britt. In the stillness of the evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the wind whispered through the grass, he would sometimes close his eyes and imagine the girl's laughter carried on the breeze. Britt. He would smile quietly, knowing that even as she moved through her own life, the bond they shared was unbroken. Life had delivered a miracle, not in grand gestures, but in quiet trust, care, and the courage to embrace connection when it appeared. And the cowboy, once entirely alone, had discovered that even the loneliest heart could find companionship, purpose, and a reason to hope. And in that knowledge, he finally felt complete.